James Whitaker had spent years believing in the fairy tale he had built with Emery. From the outside, their marriage was the epitome of success, a seamless blend of ambition and affection. They were the couple others envied, the duo who appeared effortlessly in sync. Their home was a polished sanctuary, their careers flourishing, their social life filled with elegant dinners and extravagant getaways. But beneath the surface, something intangible had begun to shift. The early morning kisses had turned mechanical, absent of their former heat. Their late-night conversations, once filled with whispered dreams and laughter, had faded into routine exchanges about work and schedules. Even their intimacy, once electric, had dulled into predictable rhythms, lacking the hunger that had once defined them. James had chalked it up to the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship, convincing himself that love didn't always burn, it sometimes smoldered. But in the quiet moments, in the spaces between words, he felt it, the void, a slow, creeping distance, something he couldn't quite name but sensed all the same. It wasn't until a single moment, a fleeting glance exchanged between Emery and Peter, that the first fissure appeared in his perfect illusion. The holiday party was a spectacle of indulgence, an opulent affair of crystal glasses brimming with aged bourbon, the hum of jazz melting into laughter, and the low, sultry glow of chandeliers casting their light across clinking champagne flutes. James arrived with Emery on his arm, her silk dress hugging every curve in a way that made him remember the early days, when desire between them had been effortless. But as the night unraveled, so did the illusion of their perfect union. He noticed it first in her posture, subtle yet telling. A shift in the way she leaned ever so slightly toward Peter Caldwell, her work partner, as they spoke in hushed tones near the bar. Then came the touch, fingertips grazing the sleeve of Peter's tailored suit, lingering just long enough to send a jolt of unease through James's spine. It was the laughter next, that breathy, intimate kind that she once reserved for him alone. His stomach coiled with something dark, something primal. The room around him blurred, voices and music fading as he watched the silent betrayal unfold in gestures too fleeting for most to catch, but unmistakable to the man who had memorized every inch of his wife's body, every nuance of her affection. James didn't react, not yet. Instead, he poured himself another drink, let the bourbon burn his throat, and smirked. She thought he didn't see. But he did, and he would remember. James had never been the jealous type. He wasn't the husband who scrolled through Emery's phone, nor the man who dissected every glance she exchanged with another. But after that night at the holiday party, something insidious had taken root, a whisper of suspicion that refused to be ignored. It started with the small things. The way she had suddenly become more possessive of her phone, how she angled the screen away when he entered the room, the way she lingered in the bathroom after her nightly shower, fingers tapping softly against the screen before slipping beneath the covers. There were new perfume notes in their sheets. Not his cologne and not hers, something masculine, unfamiliar. James told himself he was imagining it, that he was paranoid, but paranoia didn't explain the nights she came home late with flushed cheeks and excuses that never quite lined up. It didn't explain the stammer in her voice when he asked who she had been with, or the way she turned away from his touch, as if guilty hands could not bear to be held. Still, he played along, pretending to be the same trusting husband. He kissed her goodbye in the mornings, left sweet notes in her car like always. But beneath it all, he had already begun his hunt. James was no fool. He knew that if Emery was slipping away, it wasn't by accident. She was being pulled by someone else's hands, and soon, he would know exactly who they belonged to. James wasn't the kind of man to react impulsively. His mind was wired for patience, for meticulous planning, for precision. If Emery was hiding something, someone, he wouldn't confront her with shaky accusations. No, he would peel back the layers of her deceit, piece by piece, until there was nowhere left for her to run. It started subtly. He feigned indifference, acting as if he hadn't noticed the way she stiffened when she received a late-night message or the way she hesitated before answering his casual questions. He let her think she had him fooled. That was her first mistake. He called an old friend, Cody, a man whose business thrived in the art of discretion, Cody didn't ask questions, he simply nodded, taking the crisp envelope of cash and setting his plan in motion. It wouldn't take long, not in a city where secrets spilled easier than fine whiskey. James followed the routine as if nothing had changed. He kissed Emery as she left for work, let his fingers linger at her waist, searching, feeling for the subtle tenseness she failed to hide. And then, he waited. By midweek, Cody's first message came through. A location, a time, a name. James felt the cold weight of confirmation settle into his chest. He stared at the text, at the undeniable proof that his wife, his Emery, had stepped out of their marriage and into the arms of another man. And that was when James finally smiled. Because now, the game had begun. James sat in his car, parked a safe distance away, his fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel as he observed the entrance of the upscale hotel. The Marion Grand, a 5-star establishment known for its discretion, where business meetings blurred into pleasure, and where stolen moments were hidden behind lavishly curtained windows. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had expected Emery to be careful, to at least show some level of hesitation, some shred of guilt, but when she stepped out of a black sedan, her hair effortlessly tousled, lips painted a shade deeper than usual, he saw none of that. There was no hesitation in the way she walked, no reluctance in the way she reached for Peter's arm, fingers grazing his wrist, the touch electric in its subtlety. James felt a slow burn coil in his chest, not just anger, but something sharper, a calculated, simmering clarity. Cody's cameras, already in place, would capture everything, every smirk, every lingering glance, every undoing of a button. But James didn't need the footage to understand. Watching Emery lean in, whispering something into Peter's ear before they disappeared inside, was all the proof he required. He exhaled, a deep, measured breath. The betrayal didn't crush him. It sharpened him. She thought she was playing a game of secrecy and seduction. What she didn't know was that James had already rewritten the rules. And soon, he'd turn her world upside down. The footage was brutal in its simplicity. No dramatic music, no slow-motion moments of betrayal, just the cold, stark reality of Emery's infidelity playing out on screen. James sat in his dimly lit office, the glow from his laptop washing over his face. His fingers curled loosely around a glass of bourbon. He barely sipped it, too focused on the undeniable truth flickering before his eyes. 11:47 a.m. Emery entered the hotel with Peter, her so-called work associate. She laughed at something he whispered, tilting her head the way she used to do with James, her hand resting lightly on Peter's arm. Familiar, intimate, practiced. James exhaled slowly, feeling the last remnants of hope leave his body like a dying breath. There was no misunderstanding, no room for doubt. She wasn't just sneaking around, she was comfortable in her deception. At 12:42 p.m., they reappeared. Emery's hair was slightly tousled, her lipstick smudged at the corners. Peter looked satisfied, smug, as he ran a hand down her back in a possessive stroke. They parted ways at the curb, Emery fixing her blouse, Peter checking his phone, before disappearing into separate cabs. James closed the laptop. No yelling, no breaking things, just silence, a steady, calculating silence. Then, he smiled. Not out of amusement, not out of relief, but because now, he held all the power. Emery thought she had outplayed him. She had no idea who she was up against. James wasn't a man who reacted on impulse. No, he was a strategist. And while Emery and Peter reveled in their stolen moments, he was already moving his pieces across the board. That evening, he sent a single text to Cody, his investigator. "I'm ready." But there was another move to make first, a personal one. He wasn't going to be the humiliated husband, the fool in the dark. If Emery could have her fun, so could he, and he knew exactly where to start. Elena. She was sharp, sophisticated, and had once made it clear that she was interested, long before James had ever thought of straying. He had turned her down then, loyal to his vows, but now, his loyalty was dead. He invited her to dinner at a rooftop lounge downtown. The kind of place with low lighting and velvet booths, where wine dripped from glass to lips like a whispered promise. And James let himself lean in. Let his fingers graze her skin. Let his voice drop into that dangerous register that made a woman lean closer. By dessert, Elena's breath was warm against his ear. "Your wife is an idiot," she murmured. "Let me show you what she threw away." James didn't hesitate. That night, he took back control. If Emery wanted to play games, he was going to make sure she lost everything. James was never the type to act recklessly. His approach was calculated, methodical, a slow burn rather than an explosion. And so, while Emery continued slipping between her husband's embrace and Peter's sheets, James played the long game. The first crack appeared over breakfast. He sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Across from him, Emery sipped her coffee, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. "Ran into Elena last night," James said casually, stirring his black coffee. "You remember her, don't you?" Emery glanced up, arching a brow. "Elena?" "The gorgeous blonde from my department," he clarified, watching her reaction like a hunter tracking prey. "She's still single, you know." There was a flicker, so small, but undeniable, a twitch in Emery's fingers, a shift in her posture. James let the silence stretch before delivering the killing blow. "She's been dying to spend time with me," he added, leaning back, "so I let her." The coffee mug paused at Emery's lips. Her breath hitched, just slightly, but enough for James to notice. Good. He wanted her to feel it, that sickening, sinking feeling of doubt, the same way he had. He didn't elaborate, didn't offer details. He didn't have to. Instead, he picked up his phone, thumb gliding over the screen as if he had far more interesting things to occupy his time. Emery swallowed hard, her voice forced and light. "That's nice." James smirked. "Let the games begin." James had waited for this moment, the culmination of weeks of patience, of quiet restraint, of letting Emery believe she still held all the cards. But now, it was his turn to tip the scales. The boardroom at Emery's office was filled with hushed murmurs as James stepped inside. His tailored suit crisp, his presence commanding, Peter sat at the head of the table, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. Emery, seated just a few chairs away, barely concealed her shock as James approached the podium. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice smooth and assured. "Before we begin, there's a matter of transparency that must be addressed." He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a sleek black folder, thick with evidence, emails, text exchanges, surveillance stills, each page a damning blow to their supposed discretion. Peter paled, Emery stiffened, the room went silent. "Mr. Caldwell," James addressed the CEO directly, sliding the folder toward him. "I believe you'll find these documents enlightening." The CEO's fingers flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with every revelation. When his eyes snapped up, it was with the force of a firing squad. "Peter," his voice was ice, "pack your things." Emery's lips parted, but no words came. James had gutted her without ever raising his voice. As security escorted Peter from the building, James turned to his wife. "Enjoy your lunch breaks, darling," he murmured, then walked out, leaving her to drown in the wreckage. James stood outside the towering glass building, the cold morning air biting at his skin, yet he had never felt warmer inside. Behind him, the empire that Emery and Peter had built on lies was crumbling. Piece by piece, the aftermath of his revelation had sent shockwaves through the company. Peter was fired on the spot, his reputation reduced to ashes. Emery? She wasn't just humiliated, she was ruined. The whispers had already begun. Colleagues eyeing her with judgment. The very men and women who once admired her now keeping their distance. She stumbled outside a few minutes later. Disoriented, desperate. "James," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Please, let's talk." He turned, slowly, deliberately, meeting her gaze with an unreadable expression. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't hurt. That part of him had already died. He had given her everything: love, trust, devotion, and she had thrown it away. There's nothing left to say. Emery, he said smoothly, stepping past her, you made your choice. Now you get to live with it. Her hand reached for him. But he didn't stop. He didn't need to. James slid into the sleek black car waiting at the curb. In the passenger seat, Cody smirked, already lighting up a cigarette. Told you this would be one hell of a show. James chuckled, exhaling for what felt like the first time in months. And it's only just beginning. As the car pulled away, he didn't look back. The past was ashes. The future was his. Betrayal, whether in relationships or in business, often thrives in secrecy. And the painful truth is that deception can hide in plain sight. In today's world, trust should be given wisely, but never blindly. Pay attention to patterns, not just words. True intentions are revealed through actions, not empty promises. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Self-worth isn't found in chasing someone who doesn't value you. When betrayal strikes, don't seek revenge, seek clarity. The best form of retribution is moving forward with strength, dignity, and success. Never let someone's dishonesty define your future. Instead, let it fuel your rise.